It's a pleasure today to have not somebody that you really respect a great deal, but also a personal friend. It's George Moore. George is a friend ever since he arrived here about nearly 15 years ago. George is one of the colleagues who is really, in many sense, almost a Renaissance person. He is a graduate of the Naval Academy. He has a PhD in nuclear engineering from Berkeley. He's also a lawyer. He's also expert on aviation. He has spent time at the IAEA, so he has these international things. And it's a great colleagues to have, so I'm very, very proud to have him today. For some time, George has interest in an area which I think he is one of the early pioneers, and that's the issue of drones in the overall broad implication of drone technology. And indeed, when we look at the war in Ukraine, I think drone is perhaps the most effective element of warfare that has a great deal on that war from the very, very beginning. So George is going to talk about various new trends about drones, Ukraine, future of warfare, AI, and also his interest in questions of privacy. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Avner. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to cover things at a pretty rapid pace. So in contrast to what I normally do, let me ask you to hold your questions to the end. I want to get through this, and there's a lot of stuff to cover. The other thing I want to tell you up front is there are a bunch of video links in this presentation. I am not going to play them all, but I will make the presentation available to everyone who wants it. Send me an email, gmoore@middlebury.edu, and I'll send you a copy of the presentation, because some of these are things you may want to go back and look at later. So here's what we're going to cover today. Introduction, types and uses of drones, military applications, lethal drones, U.S. targeting with drones. We're going to cover Ukraine, Russian Federation, things that are going on there. Other drone threats. That means other threats in other parts of the world, where people are employing drones now. We'll talk about some issues related to AI and how that's going to affect things and how it is affecting things. And we're going to talk about privacy and what I call mega threats. These are using drones essentially to do a lot of aerial surveillance type that most people have never seen or even thought about. So, as I said, let's hold off the audience participation towards the end because I'm a little afraid to run out of time. Let's start out by talking about what's a drone. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but maybe not so much, because in a lot of parts of the world, they're referred to differently. You may see drones referred to as remotely piloted aircraft. Of course, drones include more than aircraft. They include things that float, things that go underwater, things that creep along the ground. But primarily, we're going to be focusing on airborne drones in this presentation. So they're also referred to as remotely piloted vehicles. You can read through this list. But when we get to the U.S., we primarily refer to them as UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. The current term and preferred term now would be uncrewed aerial vehicles or uncrewed aerial systems. A little more progressive. So all of these things are used interchangeably with the word drone. You have to be a little bit specific when you look at an article about drone to see exactly what they're talking about. This last thing I'll throw out, and this is something for you to consider, is a cruise missile drone. Some of the things that are being referred to in Ukraine particularly, and used by people coming out of Yemen, are really more cruise missiles. How does the Missile Technology Control Regime, the MTCR, deal with those things? Something for you to consider. Okay, who knows what that is?
Is that a Reaper?
That's a Reaper. How can you tell?
I
How can you tell it, what's this?
Predator.
It's a predator. Yeah, okay. Difference is, tails up, it's a reaper, tails down, it's a predator. You learn one thing today, that's one to remember. Okay, tails up, it's a reaper, tails down, it's a predator. Both made by General Dynamics, and actually it's almost a trick question because the reaper was originally referred to as Predator B. Reaper is a bigger device. Notice it's carrying a couple of missiles under the wing. It carries a lot more load than a Predator. In fact, the Predators are really out of service at this point in time. So that's a Bayraktar. That's a Turkish-built drone used by the Ukrainians early in the war. Not so much anymore because Russian control of the airspace has made it nearly impossible for the Bayraktars to operate at altitude. Very similar in performance to kind of, I'd say, a low-grade Predator. So it flies 20, 25,000 feet, that sort of thing. That is a global hawk. That is one of the few really autonomous drones in the sense that it can fly a mission. That's a big thing. That's about the size of a old 727. This is an Air Force version. The Navy has a version which they're phasing out. This thing can actually, they don't fly it this way, but this thing can actually come out of its revetment, fire up its engines, come out of its revetment, take the runway, fly its mission, fly back, has great range. You can fly this thing 10, 15,000 miles, no mid-air refueling. Come back and land, taxi in its revetment, and shut down, all autonomously. They don't fly it that way. They fly it just like the others as remotely piloted units. This is a old Predator type station. Reaper is very similar. On the left-hand side, these are military type vans, and they use these even in the United States. The idea is that everybody should be familiar. They can operate these in the forward area. They can operate them from the States. On the right-hand side, you see an operator console, two-person crew. There's a pilot and there's a sensor operator. The consoles are interchangeable, so they can switch over, and if they have a casualty, they can move and just use one console. But I actually was in one of these with a Predator outfit back about 4 years ago. They were actually flying missions over the tribal area of Pakistan at the time. These are 24/7 operations. It's a very weird environment. In fact, some of the operators suffer from PTSD. They, you get up in the morning, have breakfast, go to work, start tracking people thousands of miles away. These people become, in contrast to fighter pilots who might come in and drop a bomb load and leave the area, these people live with the people that they're looking for maybe for a month or 2 months until they get a clear shot. And these things are all carefully monitored. There's a 24/7 on-duty Judge Advocate General Corps to clear every mission where they're going to release a weapon. The footprint that they can see on the ground in high magnification is about the size of a football field. But when you're operating from the United States, and the way they're typically operated, they're flown out of a forward operating base. And there's a van just like this, and there's a launch and recovery crew at that base, flies it up, gets it up to altitude, and transfers control back to someplace in the United States. The place I was at was in Kansas. But there's Nellis Air Force Base up here in Northern California. There's a base that they operate from. But there's an inherent delay because of the delay in satellite comms. So when they make a decision to release a weapon, that weapon is gone, and they have about a 4-second delay. And I know, talking to the XO, he said at some point, going after a car, everything's been cleared, release the weapon, all of a sudden coming into view, coming the other way, another vehicle. Can't do anything about it. It's collateral damage. They try and minimize that as much as possible, but it happens. So this is a little switchblade drone. This is an example of what some people call a kamikaze drone. It's just a fire and forget weapon. It goes out of the tube, it goes towards its target and crashes into it. A lot of the drones now are like that. There are some that go out and recover, but there are a lot of them that just are one-way flights. And this is a little quadcopter. In the upper left is an old Phantom II DJI Chinese-made drone. Down on the right is also a Chinese-made drone. That's a Mavic upgrade, Mavic Pro, a generation ago. These have been used in and modified using the Ukraine war, close in. These things fly on Wi-Fi frequencies, so they're quite easy to, well, I should say quite easy. They can be jammed. There are a lot of counters to these, but they're an example of something where they've taken a commercial drone and weaponized it. But drones are not a new concept. And we're going to talk about that for just a minute. Other than the guys who see, some of you have seen this presentation before. Who's the guy on the right? Well, first of all, who's the guy on the left?
JFK.
JFK, yeah. Who's the guy on the right?
That's his brother.
His brother. That's the guy who should have been president. How was he killed? He was killed flying a drone.
Oh, right.
There
Yeah.
was a secret Navy program or a secret military program during the Second War. He was a naval aviator, and they took old burnout bombers. This is a B-24. In his case, he was actually flying a Navy version, which is a privateer. It's a little bit different configuration, but looks very similar. Filled them up with explosives. The pilot would fly the target or fly the drone towards the target, bail out before he got into enemy territory, and then this thing would continue on an autopilot. Eventually, it crashed down into something highly inaccurate.
Wow.
Well, when Kennedy was flying, just about the time he was supposed to bail out, something happened and the whole plane exploded. So there was not even a body to bury or anything like that. But, you know, this is older technology. This is Vietnam era. These are Ryan Firebee drones. They're painted orange because these drones were used for target practice primarily. But during the war, these were flown in over North Vietnam to do photo reconnaissance. This is the old days before a lot of satellite linkage, before a lot of digital data transfer. These took film camera images, and the drones flew out into the Gulf of Tonkin, and they were recovered by Navy units. We used to call these buffalo hunters. The reason they were called buffalo hunters is a lot of the films were of water buffalo standing in the field, looking up and saying, "What the hell is that?" The Air Force didn't like that. It's primarily an Air Force program. These are more modern drones, upgrades of the Firebee. Again, launch platform C-130, more capability, more reconnaissance capability. That is a Kettering doodlebug. That's right at the end of the First World War. One of the first examples of using Sperry gyroscopes to enable an autopilot. The same idea as the later one, which killed Kennedy's older brother. Fill it up with some explosives, fly it out on a bearing, on a heading. Do that with an autopilot driven by or controlled by gyroscopes. Cut off the engine, comes down, crashes, and explodes. Never used in combat, but if you ever get to the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson, they have a recreation built from plans. This is not an original doodlebug, but that's the original doodlebug, or that's a copy of the doodlebug in Wright-Patterson in Ohio. Early use. You know, not all drones are. This is Vienna, 1849. The Austrians attacked Vienna with hot air balloons, unmanned hot air balloons. They had a timer on them, some kind of crude timer. They flew over the city and dropped bombs into the city. Early use of the idea, but not as early on. Even before that, the Greeks developed Greek fire. There were a whole series of what are called fire ships. These were ships that were ignited, some of them with the same kind of compound that the Greeks used in Greek fire. And you would sail them into the enemy fleet, try and crash into their fleet. Good weapon if you're upwind, doesn't work very well if you're downwind. Concept's an old concept. What has made it possible now to do much more with these things? Upgrades in electronics. miniaturization, digitization, upgrades in communication. But the idea is very old. Drone types and uses, what are we talking about here? Well, there are military drones, there are civilian drones, there are dual-use drones. The categories are not clearly defined. The military has, it's a little hard to read here, but they have a classification grouping of 5 groups based primarily on size, speed, range. So if you read across the top, you've got the maximum gross takeoff weight, the normal operating altitude, speed, and the last column is representative ones. You could add any number of things to this. The group 5 are the big ones. That's the Reaper, that's Global Hawk. The Navy version is the RQ-4N Triton, but the Navy's getting rid of those. They don't see them as part of their mission. So this is one way of classifying drones, and probably the one that's most commonly used in the government. Why drones? Well, of course, there's obvious things, but there's sometimes questions about this. Safety. Well, is this a safer system to use in some situations? Or is it more prone to failure? Is it more prone to collateral damage, creating collateral damage? Certainly the drones that the Russians are using, and maybe also the Ukrainians are using in the Ukraine war, I'll keep referring to it as a war, they may not be very safe in terms of collateral damage. You might be better off with more precision guidance of weapons released from aircraft, etc. Endurance, that's a big factor. In the tribal areas of Pakistan, they can put a Reaper up there. That Reaper can stay aloft for maybe 24 hours doing its mission. You can't put a pilot up there for that long. They just don't persist, even though there are medical enhancements that we do with pilots to try and keep them alert and active. What about cost? Everybody says, oh, drones are cheaper. Let's buy a whole bunch of drones. Well, they may not be all that much cheaper. They get lost at a much higher rate for a number of reasons, and they may not have the capabilities. So if you're really talking about this, and I've been talking to some people about, well, you just announced you're going to buy a new type fighter for the Air Force. Why not spend that money on drones, which might have that kind of capability? Or why not have one fighter and one drone to accompany it? Well, if you start talking about that, then you have to look at, well, the drone that accompanies it has to have the same performance specs, has to be able to fly along with it, has to have the same kind of speed capability, maneuvering capability. Drones are great in terms of maneuvering because you don't have a pilot that you have to worry about. They can pull, if they're structured properly, if they're built properly, they can pull a lot more Gs. They can do a lot of things that a manned aircraft or crewed aircraft can't do. But what about ability? Well, then you get into a lot of trade-offs. Is it one of the reasons that you lose drones at a higher rate is on takeoff and landing, the operator's view is pretty narrow. It's like kind of not looking through a straw, but it's a limited view. If you're a pilot can move their head around, they can see things, they can feel things, see through their pants. The drone operator is not feeling all those things. They're just doing it by what they can see. So all of these are questions that you ask when you look at a drone for a specific task. And for many tasks, the answer is clearly drones are better. For some tasks, it may be questionable. There's, of course, when you talk about it in the military concept in the United States, there's a lot of resistance by some people to uncrewed aircraft because they're pilots. They like flying airplanes. So, they're a little reluctant to, if you watch the last Tom Cruise movie, the last Maverick movie, and remember at the beginning of the movie, there's this scene about the drone ranger who comes in and is going to shut down their manned program. Anyway, the last thing here, this is something, a little paraphrasing of Star Trek, where you want to use drones is to boldly go where man or woman cannot go, should not go, or where it costs too much for a man or woman to go. And that pretty much encapsulates why you want to use drones and where you want to use them. Civilian uses, growing list. You can just read through the list. This is a list from an older Rick Brecht is an attorney down in Florida who wrote a early on book in drone law. There actually is some stuff about drone law and insurance and that sort of thing. But a number of different things. One of the strangest ones that I've run across is I was actually doing a program, and one of the people in the program was a marine biologist, and he wanted to use drones to measure whales in the water. It's like, why do you want to measure whales in the water? Well, he said, we've never been able to measure them in the water. When they come up on land, they don't measure out the same way. We think there's differences in what their measurements are in the water as opposed to land. That's pretty weird, but that's what he was going to use his drones for. Communications. News media use drones. They like using drones. This creates some problems. A lot of people using drones to get footage to try and sell to the media. This creates enormous problems in some areas. In California, CAL FIRE will not fly on a fire if there are drones in the area that are not under control. And this has led to loss of property. This has led to some other things. So issues about this, issues about free speech and controlling the news media use of drones, a lot of things about privacy, both from the point of view of people who are on the receiving end of drones and conversely on the other end, First Amendment rights. Government uses. Two things lighten up, or two things are in red here: law enforcement, policing, and surveillance. These are hot button items with a lot of people. People don't worry too much about border security and that sort of thing using drones. A lot of the Predator drones have been turned over to DEA and Drug Enforcement Agency and Border Patrol. They're now being flown on things like border surveillance missions. And they're very good at that. But particularly in law enforcement, a lot of people are very concerned about using not only lethal drones, which is a big concern, but drones with facial recognition capability, which is getting better and better. Last thing, military uses, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Military uses, surveillance. This is a big, there are a lot of small drones operated at the squad and platoon level where you can throw a drone up in the air, drive it around a corner, drive it down a road, drive it over a hill, and see what's there. Then there's long-range reconnaissance. Now, you can use drones to attack things. You can use drones in electronic warfare. You can use drones in defense against other drones or against aircraft. There are a lot of concepts of using smaller swarming. Let me back up a step. Swarming means operating drones in concert. In other words, you create a swarm, like a swarm of bees or something like that. And there's been this concept that's been around for a while about unmanned or uncrewed combat aerial vehicles, which can either crash into a high-performance aircraft or attack the high-performance aircraft and make the skies very unfriendly to high-performance crewed aircraft. So a lot of concepts like that. I'm not going to stress nuclear security issues in this presentation. That's almost an entire presentation on its own. But as we go through this, think about nuclear security applications. Going back even 10, 15 years ago, Greenpeace was taking drones that looked like Superman and crashing them into containment vessels of nuclear power plants in France. So drones are a threat for a number of reasons, and countering drones is a big operation and concern. Okay, let's shift. Watch my time here. Let's shift over. U.S. targeting with drones. This is used by the U.S. government. And some of these are policy issues which you want to consider. Well, going back to the Bush administration and going through Obama, Trump 1, Biden, Trump 2, they're using drones for a lot of different reasons. I don't know that there's any executive orders about drone use at this point from the current administration, but there's been tremendous amount of tactical use of drones by deployed troops in various areas, used for intelligence gathering, to be candid about it, assassination, okay? Sometimes of US citizens. This is not, deporting them to Venezuela. This is killing them in the field when they are identified as a member of a terrorist group. It hasn't happened very often, but it raises a lot of due process issues. We seem to be able to accept the concept. Drone targeted killings seem to be very popular with the American public. It's one of these 80-20 numbers where, people don't know much about it, but, the idea is, hey, if you can take care of them so they're not a threat to the country, let's do that. Not too well thought out in some cases. Statistics are hard to come by. If you want to look for statistics, look for stuff by Zinko, who's down at the bottom of the screen. He has been collecting data on this for a long time. Collateral damage in this is, first of all, they don't even know who the targets are sometimes. They're sometimes done by profiling. Early on in the hunt for Osama bin Laden, they killed a guy who was a very tall person who was actually out collecting scrap. Because he was a very tall person, he fit the profile of Osama bin Laden and did not survive the encounter. But it's very difficult sometimes to know who they're actually taking out. Okay, so how do we as a country, what do we say about this? What's our basis for saying we can kill people in the tribal areas of Pakistan, we can kill people in Afghanistan? How can we do that? We can kill people in Yemen. Well, mainly we rely on Article 51 of the UN Charter. Let's show what that says in a minute. You have to look at all these things. How do you feel about this? How does the Geneva Convention play in about it? Is this a non-international armed conflict? We're just out there killing people because we think it's a good idea to kill people who might potentially be a threat. Well, when you look at this too, you have to think about, like with enhanced interrogation, are we creating more enemies by doing this than we're making friends? There's a video that I would recommend to you. It's an older John Oliver movie, or John Oliver, his weekly program. It's in this package. If you ask for the package, ask for the slides, you can play it. I don't want to play it here because it takes too much time. But one of the things that he has, and it's a very good program. He has some testimony, people testifying before Congress, young people from Pakistan. We're afraid. We're afraid of the drones. If you live under, this one kid says, hey, I like cloudy days now. I don't like sunny days. Cloudy days means the drones can't come and kill you. And, is that making friends for us? What are we gaining by doing this as opposed to what are we losing by doing this? And you have to think downstream. We do a lot of things because we can do them, because we're technologically superior. But that technological superiority has already eroded, and that's why you have Houthis shooting drones out of Yemen and interfering with traffic, in Red Sea, Upper Indian Ocean, things that heretofore they would not have had that capability. This is what Article 51 says, if you want to read the article. But, for example, Measures taken by members in the exercise of this right of self-defense shall be immediately reported to the Security Council and shall not in any way affect the authority and responsibility, blah, blah, blah. We don't report this stuff to the Security Council. You know, if this is our basis, what are we doing? You know, we say, well, we're defending ourselves. Pretty extenuated defense argument. But you may feel otherwise, but it's something to think about. This is the reference to the John Oliver YouTube video. This is a current reference. I've checked all the references just recently in this. Some of these are various portions of things I've used before, but I know that these all work, at least of today. So let's talk now about drone use in Ukraine and post-Ukraine. First of all, I think if you'd ask most people who did anything with drones before the war in Ukraine, would drones be a big factor? If you had a conflict between a major armed state like the Russian Federation and and people would have said, no, you know, we use drones, Pakistan tribal area, we use them in Afghanistan, we use them in other places, but that's because they can't defend themselves. Okay, they don't have capability to shoot down aircraft that are flying at 25,000 feet. You know, they just don't have that capability. But hey, if they got into a shooting war with somebody like the Russian Federation, you wouldn't be able to do this. Nobody had really thought through how impactful the low altitude drones would be and how difficult it would be for many people, for many organizations to counter them. If you look, for example, at Russians have a very different concept of using air power than the Western states do. And to some extent, they tend to view aircraft, tactical aircraft, as flying artillery. You don't see a big investment like we have in controlling the airspace with a lot of big electronic warfare aircraft or a lot of big air control aircraft. And they've had early on, they've gotten much better at it, but early on, they were having a real problem with all the drones that the Ukrainians were using. And as you'll see in a few minutes, the Ukrainians have been very good about developing their own drones. They now have some jet-powered drones that they've developed, which can strike into the Russian Federation. You've seen that they've flown drones to Moscow, attacked places there. These are not very, these are, again, things that don't navigate very well. They fly into apartment buildings. They're not targeted, well targeted. And this is where AI is going to make a difference. Hopefully the war in Ukraine won't go on that much longer, but AI is going to have an impact on drone usage. So here's, again, the Bayraktar. Again, notice it's very much like a Predator, tail configuration, a little different, pusher aircraft, fixed landing gear. These are slow. The Predators and Reapers, if they're flying against a considerable headwind, their ground speed might be 60, 65 miles an hour. Talk to these pilots and they said, you know, it's very frustrating when you're sitting there and watching cars go faster down the road than you're flying. That can happen. This is a big attack. This is over 250 some drones flown into Ukraine. Not well targeted. I mean, these drones are not capable of precision accuracy. They can be flown, given GPS guidance to a city, but they're not the kind of thing, even going back, when we first went into Kuwait, or excuse me, not Kuwait, went into Iraq. Remember the awe and shock and awe? Those were very targeted things. They were putting they were putting missiles in through windows of buildings. This is not that kind of precision, but it may get better as we get, as AI gets incorporated into these systems. We should be back to sharing. I think I'll only try this once or twice later because it just doesn't work very well at this point. Okay, so you've seen these, drones taking out tanks in Ukraine. The Russian tanks had a defect. If you look now at Russian armor, you'll see that they've welded screens on the top to create a standoff distance for drones. Tanks have what's called active armor on the sides. These are actually explosives so that a penetrating warhead hits those first, they explode and they degrade the warhead. They didn't have that kind of armor from the top, and that's why they were so susceptible to being hit. That's changed, but still, one of the things that the Ukrainians have done very successfully, and I guess the Russians have done it to some extent, is use sometimes the very small dual-use commercial drones to go out and scout and feedback locations for their artillery, for any kind of missile system that they might have that can then hit, Russian vehicles. They've really set back the use of armor, and they even go after people in trenches and things like that. This is just a little example of a small quadcopter with a bomb. I don't think that's a real picture. It's one I picked up off the internet, but that's a concept. You can actually buy, with these small drones from DJI, you can actually buy a triggering mechanism that will allow you to drop things from the drone. But their lift capability for the smaller ones is not that great. We're talking a couple of pounds. They don't fly. They also don't fly against much of a headwind if you have a headwind. So a lot of limitations on the smaller drones, but still very useful. This is, again, one of these, this is actually Marine firing down at Southern California out in the desert. That's one of the switchblade drones, comes out a little canister. These are the Shahed drones that the Iranians have been supplying to the Russian Federation. Now the Russians have their own assembly plant. I don't know quite what the arrangement is financially between Iran and Russia on this. I assume if it were a normal capitalist relationship, they'd have to build under license, they'd have to pay a fee. They may have just, ripped them off and do this. But these are a small pusher. You see the propeller in the back of the drone. They have really outstanding performance. These things, when I first saw this, I said, that can't be right. They can't have a range of 1,500 miles. That's halfway across the country, okay, across the United States. So I sat down and did the kind of thing, if you're a scientist in residence, you're supposed to be able to do these sort of things. I sat down, looked at the airframe, looked at how much fuel storage space they had, looked at the small motor that they're using, and concluded what the fuel burn was, what everything weighed. And this is realistic. They can do this. They carry a fairly good-sized warhead. You have to trade off weight in some of these. Very slow. This performs about like a Cessna, if you're familiar with general aviation aircraft, it performs about like a Cessna 150. Okay? Not a high performance thing, not a thing that's terribly difficult to shoot down, but if you're launching 250 of these towards Ukraine, that's a lot of things to have to account for. So this is actually a short video, and I won't belabor everybody by trying to go through that again, but this is a short video showing one that actually crashed in Ukraine, gives you a little close-up. They're well manufactured and very capable. Now, some of the Russian drones that they've been using, particularly early on, were very crude. And when you open them up, they're full of Western components, but they were very crude drones, but effective. Don't have to be, they had instead of having small cameras, they had big cameras in them. They were not very easy to control, and they were pretty easy to bring down. If you want to look at, get popular mechanics out of the library, they had a particular issue about every single drone fighting in the skies over Ukraine. Probably not an accurate statement of fact, but if you want to look at all the various types of drones flying in Ukraine, you can find sources like this. This is the source where you can go to look at this. Here's a little table from an online group about Ukrainian long-range drones. And notice a lot of these, or in fact the majority of these, are things that are developed in Ukraine. Ukrainians have a pretty active aircraft industry, and they can develop their own drones and have been developing it. There's a drone here. Again, I won't play this. You can watch the video yourself. This is a long-range missile drone. It looks like this. It's very reminiscent almost of some of the old World War II technology, the V1. These are launched, it's jet-powered. The wheels come off. That's just a skid that it launches on, goes down the runway, and when it lifts off, the wheels just drop off. That's just a platform that allows it to launch. And they've been using these in attacking places in the Russian Federation. They have a pretty good size warhead on it, and it can be very effective. So, what do you want to think about when you think about drones in Ukraine? First of all, big tactical change. This has had a big impact on the use of armored vehicles by the militaries on both sides. It's had a big effect on troop concentrations, had a big effect on how we do things. Now, we always say that, when you prepare for the next war, you're preparing for the wrong thing. That, right now everybody's crazy for drones and everybody's looking at drone countermeasures. Big business. Big business in terms of drone countermeasures in the military, big business in drone countermeasures when you look at protecting nuclear power plants, missile silos, things like that. Who knows what's going to come on downstream? But we're spending a lot of money on new drones and new. I just got this morning got a notice about a new underwater drone that the Navy's developing, a general platform underwater drone. The problem with controlling drones underwater is you can't control them by radio. The transmission mechanisms underwater are very crude in comparison to what you can do with an aerial drone or even with a surface drone. So there'll be big changes. You're going to see drones taking over some of the tasks. One of the things that the Navy's been doing with carrier aviation is they now have a drone refueler that they can fly. In the past, they've flown a regular aircraft with what used to be called a buddy pack. They put on a fuel rig that can refuel other aircraft. Not a very effective way of doing this. Much cruder than the way the Air Force does in-flight refueling. But now they can do that with a drone, and the drone can stay aloft much longer time frame than the manned aircraft doing the same task. So a lot of changes coming along. Maybe ones that won't last, maybe ones that will. This is a video of Neptune missiles that the Ukrainians have developed. These are their own developed missiles. 1,000-kilometer range, fired from a TEL. This TEL is a transporter vehicle, come out of tubes, launch tubes. It's sophisticated stuff. This is not stuff that they're being given by somebody else. This is not stuff that they're cobbing together. These are well-developed airframes with well-developed guidance systems. and very effective. They've also used, they've developed a whole cadre of these small surface, as you would call them again, kamikaze drones. This is a type of drone boat that was responsible for sinking the flagship of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. And that was actually done in conjunction with airborne drones, which were distracting the Moskva at the time that they were attacked by the surface drones and eventually sunk. So small, low cost. They pretty much neutralized the Black Sea in terms of denying it to a lot of the Russian transport. So where do we go from Ukraine? The big difference that's going to come is in AI, in my opinion. The reason for that is there's not going to be, you can't do too much more with the airframes. Those are pretty fixed by just regular aerodynamics. We've been designing aircraft, since the Wright brothers and even before that. So there's not going to be any big major developments like, oh, wow, here's a drone that's going to fly 3 times as fast. Well, you can build a drone that's going to fly 3 times as fast. But it's basically the same technology we've had. It's just going to be a bigger, faster drone. Okay. What you're going to see, I think, is AI in terms of processing the front-end processor, doing automatic updates. In the earlier versions of cruise missiles, there were terrain strips, and they were actually looking, as the missile was flying, they were looking at the terrain to correct the autopilot. The problem that these things are having right now is they don't correct well in flight. You just have to say, well, you want to go to this geographical reference and get there. They don't adapt well to changes in wind shift. They don't adapt well. The autopilots are not sophisticated enough. AI is going to change some of that. It already is. I mean, now, I remember taking a drone up to DLI. I was invited up to do a little demonstration and managed to crash it into a tree. Well, now cheap drones have collision avoidance and would never have flown into the tree that I flew into. Would have kept me from flying into the tree. It was not a bad tree smack. Broke a prop, but that's about it. So, going to be a big difference with AI, hopefully. But this is not a U.S. This is a list of countries that are doing drones. You don't have to agree with the global role. For the U.S., it says leads global market and sets benchmarks. Maybe not true. You might certainly argue that China fills a lot of that role. But if you read down the left, the United States, China, Turkey, Israel. Israel used to be the biggest supplier of military drones in the years prior to the war in Ukraine. Russia, India, France, Australia, South Korea, Germany. All the major players are building drones, and even minor players are building drones. And these have to be dealt with. You can get a top 10 list if you want to do that. If you go to this site, don't necessarily agree with it, but you'll see articles about things like that. These are Iran's ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. Not a complete list, probably, but if you look at the first 3 at the upper left, I don't know how you pronounce it, the Causby, Yali, Sumar, those would probably be described as drones. Quds, you pronounce it. But, they have a lot of range. These should be covered under the MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime, has a limitation of 300 miles, things in excess, they have a range capability in excess of 300 miles. And, the first 3 basically go into that. But it's just a point that everybody has these capabilities. Now, of course, Iran tried to attack Israel with missiles, didn't fare too well, and the U.S. got involved in that, in countering. Going back, we're talking now 6 years ago, the Houthis unveiled a collection of UAVs which they claim to have manufactured domestically. In other words, they said, we're not getting these from Iran, we're making them themselves. And here's a picture of them that they put out on the internet of various drones that they have. And they're launching up areas around their Sana. You see the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, getting down to the Indian Ocean. This is causing a lot of problems. And the U.S. has spent, our ships in that area have expended a lot of ordnance, some of it very expensive ordnance, in bringing down some of these drones. And a few of them have gotten through and damaged tankers and freighters. So, this is no longer big countries doing things. These are, you could say they're terrorist groups or at least a subnational group doing things, and these groups have or are acquiring this type of capability. If you go to this site, this is actually a UK vendor who will, you want a drone, they'll put you in contact with a manufacturer who will deliver a drone for you. This is out in the open, this is commercially traded. Okay. Everybody's had enough of this about drones and warfare and assassination. I want to talk about some things that are more pertinent maybe to us on an individual basis and certainly on a national basis, domestic basis. First, privacy issues. If you watch this video, this is a video, older video now. There was a woman who was sunbathing on a beach back on the East Coast. And somebody flew a drone over where she's sunbathing. And she's wearing a bathing suit. This is not anything. And she was incensed by this. And she followed the drone back to where it came from. And it was operated by this guy. And this is the drone. And he's being interviewed by, I guess we could call him a journalist. And they got into an altercation. And she got arrested for assaulting him. Her name was Andrea Mears. And if you watch the video of this guy, I think charitably speaking, you might think he's kind of a jerk, which he might be. It just raises, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about having a drone fly over you and take pictures of you, or hang outside the window here and look in the window? Well, these are all issues which we still haven't really dealt with. FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, they don't care about privacy. The logo, if you can't read it on there, they striped over an armadillo, and it ain't my job to move the armadillo. We just put out the stripes on the road. And the FAA doesn't care about your privacy. Their regulations are not for privacy. Their regulations are about safety. They care about operating drones domestically in a safe manner. We do operate these military drones. I mentioned before, up in Northern California, not too much, a couple hundred miles from here, is Beale Air Force Base. And when they bring a big drone into Beale Air Force Base, it comes with a chase plane, a manned chase plane, a crewed chase plane. And the chase plane communicates with air traffic control and gets them clearance to fly in the airspace. So there are all these things that you have to do. The FAA, privacy is not their issue. Whose issue is it? That's very much up in the air. Because the FAA controls all the airspace. The federal government controls the airspace. The airspace outside these windows, the airspace over the roof of that of the CNS building, it's all controlled by the FAA. And the FAA and the federal government have been pretty jealous guardians of that. Again, this stuff changes so much on a daily basis, it's almost crazy. Today there was an article about how Florida is trying to create a law, or has proposed a law, that would allow people to shoot down drones over their residence or property. And the FAA has said, you can't do that. We control the airspace. Those are aircraft. You damage a drone, that's no different than going out and damaging a 737 out at the airport. We own the airspace. These are registered aircraft. We'll talk about registration in a minute, but it's a big deal, and we haven't worked it out. One of the major things when we talked about the law enforcement, we talk about law enforcement, is the Fourth Amendment. Okay, our, being free from, let's just call it unlawful search and seizure, to make it simple. But you have no privacy when you're out in the street. You give up your privacy. You don't have so how do you retain your privacy? Well, in classic Fourth Amendment law, and we have classic cases of aerial surveillance which relate to search and seizure, the demand that a police agency get a search warrant to carry out that type of surveillance. And by and large, it really doesn't apply to drones, and we don't have anything yet to replace it. There is a two-pronged test for privacy. The first prong of the test comes from their Supreme Court case. The first prong of the test is, does the person have a subjective expectation of their privacy? Okay. Build in the word for us. Do they have, in other words, do they believe that what they're doing should be private? And when you make a phone call, you believe that should be private. Okay? So that's the first test. Second part of the test is this a right that society is willing to give them, or to grant to them? And that's a flexible measure, because things heretofore which people thought were private, we've had some erosions of that. And I don't know if you followed, I'm sure many of you have. Recently, if you come back through the border, they can apparently seize your cell phone, ask you to make you open it up and look and see whatever you've got in your cell phone. A little bizarre. That's U.S. citizens, as well as, we're not just talking about people coming into the country on a visa or that sort of thing. That's, you have no rights at the border, but internally you do. So this is an old thing by Prosser, who was kind of the dean of tort law, which is civil wrongs. But basically it says you can, taking somebody's picture, what about if you're listening to them? Right now, there's nothing illegal about flying a drone right outside the window here. Okay. Now, if that drone is taking photos inside this building, is that a problem? If it's making a sound recording, what's inside the building, is that a problem? These are questions that we haven't answered. So we've got these regulatory issues. Congress could make a law, and they control the FAA. They could say, FAA, make a law. Different countries have different laws. Right now, the commercial regulations in the United States, Part 107 of the FAR, say that you can fly within any distance, standoff distance of a building. You can fly up to 400 feet above ground level. You can fly up to 400 feet above a building. Now in Canada, you have to stand off distance from a building to the sides. That's enough distance that it probably makes it, well, it's enough standoff distance that you probably don't have to worry about the drone peering in the window. Okay. They've introduced several bills. They've never come to a conclusion in Congress about this. And you can read a lot of law review articles about whether the state or the local municipality is better positioned to make drone regulations. But right now, it's up in the air, and it's currently being litigated in a number of fora. The key word here is preemption. When the federal government is operating in a space, just focusing now on airspace, but it's true in everything. If they're operating in a space where the federal government is empowered to act, and they have totally occupied that space, then local and federal and state governments, non-federal operations cannot make rules affecting whatever or countering the federal rules. So the city of Monterey can write all the drone regulations that they want. Right now, they have really no effect. But that's not a very good argument if the city of Monterey says you can't fly a drone and the Monterey police arrest you for flying a drone. You may win eventually, but that's not a very good way of doing business. But this is the federal preemption issues are pretty clear at this point. And there's been some case law, the most famous, well, not famous, the one that has gotten the most attention at this point in time is a case, Singer versus City of Newton in Massachusetts. The city had a no-fly drone ordinance, and Mr. Singer said, no, I can fly my drone. It's allowed by the FAA. And so he got a civil citation, went all the way to federal district court. Judge in district court wrote a long opinion and said, hey, Singer's right. This is a field preempted by the federal government. City of Newton, you have no business writing any regulations or laws controlling this. So there's a whole series of these. These are policy questions. Most of the students here at MIS are policy students, and they're things you can think about. And when you think about it, would it make sense for the federal government to write a uniform code of privacy or a uniform code of drone regulations for the country? Well, to some extent, yes, but to some extent, no. Because drones in Alaska might be very different and have very different needs in terms of regulation and control than drones in California, or drones in rural areas might be very different from drones in cities. And those become a lot more problematic. Okay, a lot of states are doing this. A lot of states are thinking about how to do this. In California, there was 5 years or so ago, there was an assembly bill that got to the governor's desk, and the governor vetoed the bill. And although the bill had passed almost unanimously from the assembly, in California, we don't override governor's vetoes. It's just kind of a norm that's not done. So it fell by the wayside. And it would have required a massive thing. It was focused on police recording and keeping records and all sorts of things. Texas has done a lot of weird stuff. Texas maybe want to do in some areas with attempting to regulate and keep in places where they don't like the news media flying drones over hog farms and showing the unsanitary conditions of hog farms, cuts into bacon sales and that sort of thing. So they try and write regulations about that. Again, not very effectively. So here are some suggested readings if you want, if you want to get the PowerPoint. Interesting, this all starts back maybe right after the Second World War, and kind of the classic case, which I'll spend a few seconds on, is Causby. These are Supreme Court cases, the first 5 there. Causby was a guy who owned a chicken farm. And during the Second World War, the Army Air Corps, this days before the Air Force, built a training base, air base, near his chicken farm. So day and night, there were planes taking off and landing, flying over Mr. Causby's chicken, what do we call them, long buildings that they keep chickens in to lay eggs. And his chickens were upset. They didn't like this. In fact, there was testimony that they flew around, they got scared, they flew around, crashed into walls, killed themselves, egg production fell off, etc. So Mr. Causby sued the U.S. government, said, you destroyed my business. You're using my airspace. You can't use my airspace like that. Well, it created what became then known as the Causby bubble, because court said, really, the Army, you denied him the quiet enjoyment of his property. Now, he doesn't have air rights all the way to the heavens like we used to talk about, but you got to give him some space. You can't just do this. And so they had to compensate Mr. Causby for the intrusion into his property. And it created what's called the Causby bubble. And a lot of the following cases, judges love to write about Mr. Causby and his crazy chickens. So you'll see Causby referred to and the Causby bubble referred to in a lot of later cases about privacy rights over property. Okay. I want to conclude this before we get into the question and answers with some mega privacy trends and a little bit of other stuff, because I don't think many of you have seen it. Show of hands, how many people have seen anything about Argus and Gorgon stare? Jeffrey, others? Okay. Big Brother has new tools. And when you think about this, which is drone-based, I want you to also think about satellites. Because satellites, nobody talks about surveillance from satellites. And what rights do the police agencies have to use satellite surveillance? They don't. The Monterey Police Department don't have their own satellites. But here's just a thing to think about. Let's say that you built without getting you graduated from this, you got a nice job, you bought a home, and you decided to put in a pool at your home. But you didn't want to get a permit to do it, so you just put it in the pool, and you didn't want your taxes raised. So you put in a big fence around your backyard so nobody can see your pool, and you only use your pool in the middle of the night to avoid your neighbors even knowing you have a pool. Well, the local taxman says, I'm going to get some aerial footage from satellites, and I'm going to see how many places have pools, and then they nail you. Did he require, search warrant to do that? Interesting question. Anyway, it's kind of things that, in law school, they do hypotheticals, and this brings out a lot of issues. Okay, notice, tails up, Reaper, right? Learned that first time. Pods under the wings, interesting. Not missiles, but pods. Wide area airborne surveillance. Okay. Basically what we're going to show you, and I'm going to show you a video, and then we're going to go into the Q&A. There is a capability to track in real time all movements in a small city. Track and record, stream this. And that's a pretty scary concept. Gorgon Stare is the upgrade of Argus. You just have the ability to do this. It's been done, is being done. There was actually a proposal to do this in the city of Baltimore. Didn't go very far once people in Baltimore figured out what it was. Again, Gorgon Stare. What you'll see on the video is that they integrate all bunch of cameras, like cell phone cameras, and take images and create a mosaic, and it's quite accurate. I'm going to go through these because when I come back and play this, I don't want to go through this on and off thing with screen share. I'm going to play the top video here. There's a book. The second video is from the Cato Institute, discussion of the book Eyes in the Sky, which describes this. And if you're interested, it's not a very expensive book to buy. And I'm going to talk about this and then come back to the other. What about you and a drone? Going out and buying a drone, buying it for your child, buying it for your grandparents, whatever you want to do. How does that get regulated? Well, it's very complex. The commercial, if you want to operate a drone commercially, you have to do it in accordance with Part 107 of the Federal Aviation Regulations. You have to have a drone operator's license, which I have. Not difficult to get, a little strange because you don't have to take a practical test. You just have to answer a bunch of questions, and the questions are basically what you have to answer. A lot of them are like what you have to answer for a private pilot's license. Recreational use is non-commercial use, but you can't just fly anywhere. The FAA, this website Before You Fly, and the new thing is, as of about a year ago, to fly in certain areas, you have to have a device which transmits the ID of your drone. Not just your drone registration on the side, but actually transmits information from your drone. This is not to prevent collisions, it's to allow the police or agencies to track you. Now, if you don't have that type of equipment, you can ask for a waiver, or you can fly in the FRIA zones, which are federally something areas, which are areas that the FAA has said you can operate without having this squealer on your drone. Retrofitting the squealers is a pretty expensive operation, so most people who have older drones have not. It's been incorporated in the new ones. I have an older Phantom 2, one of the first versions of Phantom DJI drones. It's great. It will become valuable later because it doesn't incorporate all the safety features. Modern drones, if you buy them, have what's called geofencing. In other words, it's already pre-programmed with areas that the drone, you can't even start the drone up in those areas. It's just put in by the manufacturer based on what information they're given to keep drones from flying in those areas. So let's go back. All you want to get out of this is that it's complex. You need to know what you're doing. You do have to register your drone, even for recreational use. Avner, you want to?
Thank you, George, for the tour de force of all this drone myriad of possibilities and implications and the like. Indeed, anybody want to start with a question? Comment, thought? Amir.
Thanks again, Dr. Moore. And so when it comes to the privacy issue, I feel we already have little drones in our pockets that just don't fly. So the privacy has already been infringed upon by the private sector in so many ways. I can bet that 75% of the people in this room already have us all exposed in one way or another because of the configurations on their phone, for example. Whether microphone, camera, or if they're hacked. So when it comes to privacy versus security, which one would outweigh the pros and cons here and the benefit versus the issue of privacy, in your opinion?
Well, there's actually bringing up an interesting question here because last couple of years, there was a Supreme Court decision on privacy of phones. Before that decision, if the police arrested you, they were allowed to search anything that you had on you. So the question is, what about cell phone? Can they open your cell phone? Force you to open your cell phone? I'm not talking about at the border where it's clear that they can. We're talking about internally in the country. And the Supreme Court decided, no, they can't do that without a warrant. There's just too much information in there. And it was one of the cases was they had opened up this guy's cell phone And it showed, he had pictures in it showing him and his cohorts committing a crime. So of course they said, hey, you hoisted yourself on your own petard. You know, here's this evidence. The Supreme Court blocked it. And, you know, if you were a not so charitable viewer of the Supreme Court, some people said, well, you know, they may be old, but at least most of them have smartphones, so they do understand some things about technology. Because technology decisions in courts are often very, very difficult to come by. Certainly, people, I think people of my generation view that people of younger generation are much more willing to give up a lot of personal information, okay, and expose themselves to risk for identity theft and that sort of thing. So I don't know exactly how you know, everybody has to make that decision on their own about, you know, but what the focus of this is more on what can the police do privacy-wise, government do privacy-wise, as opposed to what, you know, what some consumer can do or some consumer agency. I mean, all your data is being scarfed up now. A lot of your data is going into mega models. We have legally issues around ChatGPT and how much, not ChatGPT, but generally the AI models that you're using now. There are a lot of issues around that and how much data they can just bring in that might be protected by intellectual property rights and that sort of thing. And again, it's very difficult to deal with these, and it hasn't been done well. And the courts are probably the worst way of dealing with these, with regulation. If you let the courts do it, it's going to be all jumbled up. If we had a coherent legislative process at the national level, and even sometimes at the state level, where they could focus on coming up with good regulations, or at least regulations that are well thought through, be different. I'm not sure I can answer your question directly, but that's kind of some of the boundaries around which these things need to operate. You know, privacy versus security, we're willing, you know, 40 years ago or so, people would have thought it unthinkable. They have TSA at airports. And we had airplane hijackings and blah, blah, blah. And people, okay, we're willing to give up our privacy rights to board an aircraft to be safe. And that's a fluid dynamic. If you look at the last of the cases, of the 5 cases that were under privacy, it's a case that involves a drug dealer. Most of the aerial surveillance cases involve drug dealers looking for drugs from the air. This actually is a little different. This is a case, I think it was in Portland or somewhere up in the Pacific Northwest. And they knew, or they thought they knew, that this guy was a drug dealer. They thought he was growing stuff in his house, condo, and they didn't have enough information to go to a judge and get a warrant. They knew that. So what they did is they went by on the street with a thermal imager. And they went to the judge and said, look, we went all through the neighborhood. Here's all the things we've seen in the neighborhood. All these houses are cold. If you're growing plants inside, you need glow lamps, big power source. And this guy's house lit up like a Christmas tree. Judge is good enough for me, signed off on it. This case went up, and when they went into the house, they were right. You know, it's full of stuff. And this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, actually came through the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit said, no, it's okay, which is a little bit unusual for the Ninth Circuit. Ninth Circuit covers California, Hawaii, and, you know, that sort of thing. Generally viewed as the most liberal of the circuit courts. In our federal court system, you start at the district court level, and you go to the circuit court level, apply to the Supreme Court. And almost no one gets to the Supreme Court. Well, this case got to the Supreme Court. And the majority opinion, which was written by Anton Scalia and joined by Clarence Thomas, they said, no, police were wrong. They needed a search warrant to do this, even though they never intruded on the person's property. etc. Now, why did they do that? Well, maybe Scalia said, "Hey, let's just fool everybody, and we'll write an opinion that this is nuts." Actually, no. Scalia was always a proponent of kind of the "your home is your castle" thing, and he littered his opinion with references to what intrusion there was in getting this information out from the home. And it's a good decision as far as it goes, but it's a decision based on the fact that there are statements in there like, well, he didn't understand that this could be viewed from outside the home. But this guy never watched Cops on TV where they have FLIR devices and they're, tracking criminals. It's a slippery, slidey case. And all these cases are going forward going to be kind of slippery and slidey. So anyway, it's an interesting question.
Lauren, do we have any interesting?
I believe Alan McGaith turned on his camera online. Did you have a question, Alan?
One of the issues, Professor, about I think the AI factor, if we start digging into what AI does or how it farms new ideas and pushes out new ideas, I think the issue of privacy almost becomes moot to that extent. And as you have pointed out about the, how do you address issues of privacy, and AI is most definitely a component of the factor of privacy. The courts, I think, as you rightly point out, Professor, is a very analog way to deal with a technology or a process that is working at hyperspeed and changing in so many ways all the time and anytime, anywhere. And that is sort of like, for me, I struggle with the concept of how we even identify the issue of privacy. So privacy in your generation, Professor, is very, very different than Gen Z or Gen, all these different because generations will conceive of privacy in so many different ways. But one of the things that jumped out at me with the drone and surveillance and targeting of certainly on the war on terror is it's not so much the targeting per se. I'm always very interested in the intelligence that generates out of the field or the theater, and how does that intelligence get back into the command layers and into basically taking out a target. I think that is we quantify that process as efficient or not efficient in kinetic outcomes. So whether or not with collateral damage. So all of this kind of the arc of privacy, it doesn't only extend, in my view, to just war theater or drones outside the windows. It requires almost like a whole new conceptualization of what privacy is in the reflection of what AI does. And that's sort of like where I find a lot of I struggle with these concepts at times, but whenever we come up and we speak about, certainly with drones, and it does raise issues. So I just wanted to point it out. It wasn't really a question. It was more like a sort of I struggle with these conceptual frameworks, and I guess it's a very good thing that I do.
Alan, I think everybody's struggling with these things now, and there's you're seeing the development of on various contexts. Let's just take AI as an example. I mean, at the federal level, you're seeing Congress struggling with what laws they should make related to AI, either in controlling, there's an information battle, with other countries. And one of the things that you can consider is that, the Chinese are very active in AI. You don't want to strangle the AI industry in the United States from an international competitive basis, but you do want to have protections of intellectual property. So you're seeing this at the federal level. But at the same time, you're seeing large lawsuits, civil lawsuits between major corporations about AI and property rights in intellectual property. Those sorts of things don't go on in China, at least to any great extent. So all this is kind of a mess, and people have to sort it out. It's going to get sorted out, and who knows how it's going to get sorted out. It's certainly, there have been people who have said, "Oh, AI is going to be terrible. It's going to do X, Y, and Z," and there are other people who say, "No, it's going to be, it's just like having a better." Before we had computers, this is a game changer, and it's going to increase our ability to do things tremendously. I happen to think personally fall into that camp where I think it's going to increase our ability to do things tremendously. But that's pretty much all.
Emphasize we are all in uncharted territory. Any other question from here?
Yeah, I have the question about the AI in military domain, because I think it's kind of overestimated the importance of the AI in drones, for example, because obviously you cannot incorporate ChatGPT into the drone and tell him like to fly to Moscow and like hit the Kremlin or something like that. And my question is, do we have any kind of the research how AI technology can be incorporated in drones? Because now it's kind of unclear.
Well, there are the U.S. military, DARPA, and people like that are looking at those issues. But I think I think it's going to come into the control systems more than anything. I mean, it's certainly not going to be real-time queries of AI. It's going to be information gathered from AI that are gathered by AI that can be loaded into a drone, at least in my opinion, can be loaded into a drone which was not available previously. Real-time, up-to-date information about targeting, real-time, up-to-date information about things en route that may help the drone to get where it's going. But no, I mean it's not a clear thing that it's going to be a leaps and bounds. That may have not so much impact as a lot of people say. Mm-hmm. Now there's certain, if you look at, for example, the anti-submarine problem in the U.S., well, anti-submarine warfare, if you look at that, there could be a huge impact because AI has the ability to integrate large amounts of data. For example, a submarine traveling even at fair depths creates minor perturbations on the surface of the water. You can't do that. You can't manage that data from the perspective that we have now. But if you can use AI to have sensors that can rapidly coalesce that data, much like what we saw with the Gorgon stare. But if you can look at a wide area of the ocean and use AI to process this information rapidly, maybe you can see patterns that we couldn't see before. Or maybe acoustically we can see patterns if you lay enough sensors or you have enough sensors in the water that can do that.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Yeah.
Yeah. So something that I've been thinking about for years, I've been saying this for years, is at some point there's going to be a political candidate who is assassinated via like a FPV drone. I was just going to ask if you have any idea, why hasn't that happened already?
They're actually, how many of you know that somebody threw a grenade at President Bush?
I knew they threw
Just a second.
shoe at him.
Yeah, I knew the shoe.
But they found a grenade a day or so after.
What?
It apparently had never gone off. It was just there. Anyway, why haven't we seen a radiological dispersion device of any magnitude? Simple enough to make, but there are constraints. People feel, I've always approached this from an RDD perspective. When you look at RDDs, you say, well, people can acquire this material, they can do these things. Terrorist groups, I think, operate, or even lone wolf people operate in a regime that they feel comfortable with. And maybe they feel more comfortable with shooting at somebody with a rifle as opposed to trying to figure out how to fly a drone with some sort of device that's going to kill somebody. It's not precluded by any means. Certainly you can also look at, why hasn't somebody used a drone at a major sporting event to spread some kind of chemical agent or biological agent, or even just to disperse talcum powder where it would terrorize everybody thinking it was some sort of chemical or biological agent. Don't know. I mean, there's some kind of limits there. I think a lot of it being that the people who want to do those things don't feel comfortable with that level of technology. They feel more comfortable with some other level of technology. Why did the guy who took a shot at President Trump, why did he use a rifle instead of a drone? And he didn't have a drone, but even if he did, he probably thought a rifle would be a better, higher success rate.
Okay, thanks.
Question of myself, George. There is a lot of speculations about the future of combat aviation, whether we come to the point of practically reaching the end of, we are what people call the fifth generations of combat aircraft, and what's going to be the next? Are we going to still have Air Force with a significant part of, manned by human beings? Or as essentially this is the very end or towards the very end of, the human manned Air Force as we know it? People Air Forces right now need to think about it in terms of planning, in terms of purchasing, in terms of how to think about it 5, 10, 15 years from now. What's your sense of at this point in the history?
Well, it depends on how far your history you want to project. Personally, I think we're going to see crewed aircraft for a long time. Maybe not 100 years, maybe not 50 years, but certainly probably for the next 20, 30 years. There's just having a pilot in the aircraft thinking all the time. We don't have anything that can match that right now. Now, if you shift to remote piloting, it's more limited.
Think.
Pardon me?
Shot at pilots.
Well, yeah. It's the drugs that do that. But I don't see that transition being total, but I think we're going to see more and more of pilot activities taken over, and maybe not so much in the military field. We may see cargo aircraft, for example, delivery aircraft. How comfortable would you be if you got on a plane and they said, sorry, there's no pilot, there's no crew. This plane is now automated. Well, when elevators used to have elevator operators, and when they started with self-service elevators, people were terrified. How can this be safe without a person there to operate it and make sure it stops on every floor? I think if you're looking at a time frame, first of all, I don't think crewed aircraft will ever go totally out of phase. But a lot of the things that we see now with crewed aircraft, I don't mean crude as in ungainly, but with flight crews, I think will persist for 50 to 100 years. I don't know.
No, but do you see that the future of Air Force will be largely not to have manned aircraft?
I think it's going to be a mix. I think it's always going to be a mix for the next 50 years or so. And I think the drone inclusion is going to be for separate roles. I think the drone inclusion, but I think it's going to take over some of the things like refueling, for example, and cargo transport. I don't know. I mean, it's everybody has their own feeling about that. But I think that
Some people need to make decisions. And
well, people have to make decisions. And people make decisions based on cost, and people make decisions based on performance. And right now, the drones don't perform as well as the manned aircraft for like fighter tasks and that sort of thing, and decision making. Certainly not at all for anything that's really autonomous, but remotely piloted vehicles, even those are limited because they're just the sensors are limited, and I don't know how well you can increase the sensor capability. It's it's big differences in the last 30, 40 years. I mean, pilots of crewed aircraft now have helmets that can control their weapon system through the looking around and doing things like that. It's not available 20, 30 years ago. So it's all shifting, but I just don't see crewed vehicles going away in the next 30, 40, 50 years. But somebody's got to manage the budget. Somebody's got to buy an Air Force. Somebody's got to buy things, and hopefully make the right decisions. Right now, the Russians can't get down at low altitudes because of shoulder-fired missiles and other anti-aircraft systems. They can't get down and attack the low-flying, slow-flying Ukrainian drones. Vice versa, the Ukrainians don't have as much of an air force as the Russians, but they're also limited. They can't do that. So just
my own philosophically speaking, my own sense is that it's extremely difficult to project things technologically and otherwise beyond the window of perhaps 3 or 4 years. I think it's become so opaque and so vague and so blurred that we really are not in a good, stable thing to talk about what could happen, how to see the future in beyond, I think, something like 3 or 4 years.
don't disagree, but we have to have long-term plans to develop the R&D. One of the things about the federal research budget, even before the current administration, is it's an annual budget for the most part. It's very difficult to, unless big contracts are let, it's very difficult for even national laboratories to plan what they're doing from year to year because they don't know what their budget's going to be. So, anyway.
Any other questions?
I think we're just at time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, George. It was a pleasure.
Remember, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, my email address is gmoore@middlebury.edu. Just send me an email, I'll send you a copy.